Hello, this is Roll for Mutation. We are a podcast talking about the history of post-apocalyptic RPGs. I'm Marc Majcher, and I'm here with Lowell Francis.
Hello.
And today we're going to look at the game Paranoia, talk about what it is, give it some context in game history and its history in media in general, talk about our own thoughts about it, and all that good stuff. Paranoia leans a bit more towards the dystopian side of things than straight post-apocalypse, but it is definitely a post-apocalyptic setting. So here we are. 1984, West End Games released the first edition of Paranoia. Paranoia is, for those who don't know, a satirical science fiction RPG, and it is set in Alpha Complex, which is a post-apocalypse dystopian surveillance state that is benevolently ruled by the computer. This is the same year that Twilight 2000 came out, so a good year for games. The first edition and second edition came as a boxed set with some dice, and in the first edition had 3 books. It had a player handbook, GM handbook, and an adventure handbook, and that had an introductory scenario in it. And these were later republished in a single volume. I think it was hardcover, and that trend continued.
Yeah, I know there's a Games Workshop British hardcover, one of those lovely editions that they licensed, at least.
Yeah, it's really nice. So in Paranoia, what do? In Paranoia, we, the players, play troubleshooters who are citizens of Alpha Complex, and they are on a team which is tasked with carrying out missions for the computer, capital C. These missions are usually nonsensical or suicidal or both, generally relatively impossible, just to encourage mayhem and problems. Alpha Complex is this dystopian state. It is constantly at war with those who hate its quote unquote utopian way of life and its happy citizens and want to see it destroyed. These enemies include communists, or in later editions, terrorists in general, mutants, and members of insidious secret societies. And it's the duty of the troubleshooters and every citizen in Alpha Complex to ferret out and report all signs of treasonous activity. Unfortunately, every character that you're playing, troubleshooters, has a mutant power, and everyone is a member of a secret society, and you may or may not be a communist as well. So that causes problems for everybody. Paranoia was one of the first RPGs, if not the very first, to explicitly pit the PCs against each other, kind of embracing and encouraging PvP play, in addition to also advising the GM to take a more expressly adversarial role against the troubleshooters, the players. For example, one of the fun things is that the possession or knowledge of the rules of the game is forbidden and treasonous and punishable by in-game execution, keeping the players themselves ignorant. Alpha Complex is this giant, vast underground city. Might be underground, might be underwater, might be in space. We don't really know. We only see the inside most of the time. This is where the leftovers of humanity after the apocalypse are surviving, thanks to the omnipresent, benevolent protection of friend computer. Everyone is taken care of. All citizens, including the PCs, are born into a clone family of 6 clones each, which in the game means that when a troubleshooter meets their tragic but inevitable end, they are seamlessly replaced with a new clone, no problem. So the player can continue playing. Most citizens in an Alpha Complex are in the clearance infrared, which means they are the mindless workers who spend most of their days heavily drugged and watching media. Troubleshooters are promoted to red clearance, and clearances go up the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, all the way up through ultraviolet, who are the high programmers who you will probably never see unless you're playing them in a later edition. All of the characters' names follow a pattern that's like your first name, and then a letter representing your clearance, your color, and then a 3-letter acronym for your sector, and that lets you make all sorts of fun joke names, the Bob R. Us, or whatever. So that's a lot of fun in the game. It's in 1984 trad game, so it has a set of attributes: strength, agility, manual dexterity, endurance, moxie, chutzpah, and mechanical aptitude. And you also get a power index for your mutant power. You also get a set of skills. In first edition, this is set up in a little skill tree. In second edition, it's less tree-ish and more just in categories. And then everyone starts off with some credits and some mandatory equipment, which may be useful or may be fatal, depending on what they decide to give you for your mission. In addition, troubleshooters are assigned a service group. You get a mutant power and you join a secret society, which are all, of course, treasonous. Troubleshooters can be in the armed forces, CPU, central processing unit, housing preservation and development and mind control, internal security, power services, PLC, production, logistics, and commissary, or research and design. And they all have their own special little benefits and drawbacks. There's a bunch of fun secret societies that carry on through the editions and get updated as we go on. In first edition, we have Anti-Mutant, Computer Freaks, the Illuminati, Scion, Death Leopard, DEATH, Frankenstein's Destroyers, Corporal Metal, like pro and anti-robot ones, Sierra Club, which knows wrong facts about the outside that no one's supposed to know about. And so those are all fun. You get secret missions to fight against each other with those. And kind of in keeping with that, like we said, the player handbook that the players get don't really explain the rules of the game at all, because that would be treasonous. It does outline, all these secret societies and service groups and whatnot. So you get a good feel for the setting and like the flow of the play and the overall tone, the satirical tone of the game as a player. The GM book has all the actual rules and more in-depth setting details that players are not going to get. And there's definitely a sharp delineation of availability of knowledge there, which leads to a lot of fun with that. You can use that to drive play a lot. Mechanically, there are a few different systems. You do attribute checks for things that you don't have skills for, and that's like a D10 dice pool where the GM gives a difficulty, you roll that many D10s and try to get under your skill. Otherwise, it's just a straight percentile check against your skills. Second edition makes it a little bit more streamlined, getting rid of the dice pool thing. And then the later Mongoose editions replace all that with a little bit more streamlined D6 pool, which might feel more familiar to a more modern audience used to that kind of thing. There's also in the older editions a bunch of like secondary attributes, carrying capacity, damage bonuses, carrying bonuses, and all that stuff that are derived, and those get streamlined away later on as well. There's no hit points. It's one of the first games I know that uses conditions instead of hit points. So instead of dropping down a number when you get damaged, you're either stunned or wounded, incapacitated, killed, or vaporized, which I think they got rid of vaporized in later editions. I'm really excited about that. Another really cool thing is back in 1984, it had the explicit advice in the GM section to not require attribute checks for tasks that couldn't possibly fail. Obviates a lot of the stuff you see in a lot of culture where people are just like rolling for everything, no matter what. And in general, the advice for combat is really cool. It talks about and this phrase stuck with me from the very first time I saw it, the dramatic tactical combat system, which does away with all the grid combat and distance and stuff, and really one of the first games I remember encouraging the more like theater of the mind combat. Helps it keep moving. It encourages the GM to mess with the players by not giving them a chance to respond if they hesitate, so you can just kill them all the time. And it's pretty light and fun, and death isn't really a terrible consequence for the first several times. So it's a good time for everyone.
So this is a really interesting game. You mentioned it comes out in 84, the same year as Twilight 2000 that we covered last episode, and a very different approach. It's still a game, especially in first edition, that has a lot of mechanical complexity that in retrospect, it almost feels like a parody, but it isn't. It is what it is at the time. When this comes out, West End Games, who eventually, like Star Wars, becomes their bread and butter. But at this point, they're primarily known for war games. They're one of the splinter groups like SPI and things like that we're doing a bunch of interesting games. And Alpha Complex was originally a concept by a guy named Dan Gelber, originally a concept by a guy named Dan Gelber, who had been running games in kind of a version of this setting. And Greg Kostikian and Eric Goldberg had found out about it or played it, I'm not sure which, but they approached him and said, "Hey, we would like to do a full game in the setting." And so we've got Gelber, Kostikian, and Goldberg doing the original box set in 1984, and it is filled with amazing art by Jim Holloway. And I am not a Jim Holloway fan. I think we established as we talked about this earlier. It absolutely 110% works here. His covers, his interior art, it is consistent, it fits, it absolutely sets the tone such that it actually makes other art used for a long time seem very bad. That first edition gets a lot of great adventures and missions published for it, including an iconic adventure called Yellow Clearance Black Box Blues. That's by John M. Ford, and I think it won the Origins Award for Best Adventure when it came
Yeah.
out. One of the things that happens there over time for those adventures is there's a gradual shift in tone. The very first edition, the box set of Paranoia, originally is funny, but it is more of a darkly kind of satirical, a little more serious. It gets more openly humorous as those modules come around. So when we get the second edition published in 1987 with updated rules, it has, a introductory adventure, it changes things over to a D20, simplifies and streamlines a lot of things throughout there. And it's the same designers, but they're joined by Ken Ralston. And because of the changes that we'd seen in the modules, this edition leans more fully into the humorous side. It definitely shifts the tone a little bit. I mean, it's recognizably the same game, but there is definitely a shift in tone. And that second edition is really successful. We have a whole bunch of adventures and missions and supplements, 21 released for that version. What happens though, as we roll along with that edition, is there is a growth of what comes to be called meta plot. And we're going to talk about that later in our game thoughts, but it goes in several directions. Some of this comes out of World of Darkness doing meta plot and some other games doing that. There are different tracks that goes on. There's explicit parodies of other RPGs that occur within there and some real changes. And that becomes a kind of controversial issue. But
Mhm.
we're going to come back to that and talk about what goes on there. So in 1995, West End Games is not doing well by this point. Very,
Mhm.
very clear. They have kind of burned their bridges and they're not doing great. But they do a fifth edition as a joke. It was second edition and they've skipped over the third and fourth edition. So do this fifth edition. Now, this has almost completely new crew of designers, and it is received very poorly. It is later declared an unproduct, and the art in this is universally terrible. It completely ditches Holloway's artwork. It looks like they got their nephew to draw a lot of it. It is some of the worst
So
art
bad.
I've ever seen in a major publication. It has that book and one release that is a Vampire the Masquerade parody themed adventure. There's talk over the next few years they're going to do another edition. There's even like some displayed sample pages from it, but by 2001, West End Games is dead. So one of the things that's very interesting, and we don't see this all this often, is the original designers got together and managed to buy the Paranoia rights, which they then licensed to Mongoose Games. So we have a period there where Paranoia is in the wilderness, it gets bought, and it's brought over to there. What happens then at Mongoose? Mongoose puts together a team, including Alan Varney, who you will know as the person behind the Bundle of Holding, who is designer of that time. I think a hugely important person in the field of RPGs today. And then And I need to explicitly say I've worked with Alan Varney, so I do have very positive thoughts regarding him based on that. So I am a little bit biased. But they put together Paranoia XP, and Mongoose releases that in 2004. And interestingly, that book explicitly has three play styles in it: Zap, Classic, and Straight, which we're going to talk about in a second. It is notable that Paranoia XP becomes not Paranoia XP, becomes Paranoia after Microsoft sends them a cease and desist because you may not remember this. I'm old enough to have used it. There was Windows XP, which is what they're referencing, and Microsoft said, please remove the XP from that.
That's the last version of Windows that I used, actually.
Yeah. The three styles that are presented are really interesting because they do represent some thoughts about what paranoia is. The first of these is Zap. This is anarchic slapstick. It's the most goofy and PvP version. It's what I think a lot of people assume paranoia is, maybe if they haven't played it, where everybody is getting killed off and you're shooting each other. It's a particular take on it that is very high goofy. The second is what is called Classic, which I think has some loaded terms to it, but is the atmosphere of second edition. And then there's also a new version called Straight, which is a approach to dark satire. It has some of the vibe of first edition Paranoia, but it's more realistic. And interestingly, the game does provide some mechanical elements and some GM elements to support that, to kind of make it so in Zap, you're turning in your fellow players and you're killing them off. In Classic, yes, you can do that, but there are potentially a lot more costs for you and hoops you have to jump through. The other thing that happens in these editions is there is, as the times have rolled on, we're now in the 21st century, there are changes in tech and changes in the satirical focus. We get PDAs, we get a parody of eBay called CBay. There's smartphones now. There are things about identity theft. There's a lot more consumerist satire, sort of bringing things up to date. We saw this in Twilight 2000 in attempts to kind of bring the timeline up. It's much more successful here. That then is revamped in 2009 as the 25th anniversary edition. This completely reconfigures and reorders the material. The rules remain largely the same, but it splits it into three books. There's Troubleshooters, which is the classic Paranoia book. And then there's an internal security book where you play these blue clearance police folk that there had been several supplements that covered this, but it focuses in on that. And then there's one that actually covers high programmers, which is a kind of high level groups manipulating things against one another. These are three different books that have their own frameworks. And also notably, like there's a focus in Troubleshooters on the classic approach being the default, writing that in, and then the other two, Zap and Straight, being kind of put in an appendix. So then another 5 years pass, and there is a Kickstarter for what's called the Red Clearance Edition. That takes quite a few years to get out, but it's designed by a completely new team: James Wallace, Grant Howlett, and Paul Dean. It's a new D6 system. It has a bunch of cards in it. It's a very nice edition. It's a beautiful little box set. It's a full reboot, and it really aims at grabbing things out of the box, sitting down, and in 5 minutes you get to playing. There is a set of XP points that are awarded by the computer, not by the GM. There's like achievements that are in there that kind of change things up. It's built around one shots. There's some cyberpunk style integrated brain eye links to the computer that kind of change up the approach. It's really striking.
Mm.
Then 3 years pass after the release in 2019, and there's a all new shiny slash perfect edition that's kickstarted and released by Mongoose in 2023. That removes those cards, which is too bad. I love cards. It removes the cards, it streamlines things, updates things, and I think it's arguably better as a product,
Yeah.
as an approachable thing. Notably, all of these additions from Mongoose provided updated versions of the most beloved earlier modules. They take them and they rewrite them and bring them up to date for these new settings and timelines and things like that. And I think most importantly, especially for XP and 25th edition, they go and they get Holloway. He comes back and does new covers. He does a lot more interior art. They get his permission to do older pieces, and it is much more consistent. There's other art that appears, but they really harken back to that, and it creates a continuity in a way that I don't think I otherwise would have expected there. So
Yeah.
that's where Paranoia stands as of today. Again, before we started recording, I said this to Marc, like Gamma World, a metric fuck ton of editions,
So many
a
editions.
shocking number of editions. But I will say, in each edition, besides fifth, many more supplements, many more releases. It's not like these were put out to die as they were with Gamma World.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, in the sort of media history and historical context, Paranoia clearly implicitly and explicitly draws inspiration from a lot of mostly dystopian media. You've got 1984, Brave New World, stuff like that. Movies like Logan's Run, THX 1138, Brazil, which came out after the first edition, but still very influential going forward, I think. You can even see some Catch 22 and whatnot in there. And if you are a fan of other Cold War dark humor, Doctor Strangelove, 100%. I particularly like the original Whoops Apocalypse series, which I don't think a lot of people have seen, but is super, super fun and really just like super sharp if you grew up in the 80s. It's real funny, real dark. Paranoia satirizes both capitalism and communism throughout the different editions, but it's always through this lens of authoritarianism and blind nationalism. And of course, this sort of focus shifts as the world shifts, going from the explicitly, making fun of the Red Scare with the commies early on, shifting to the war on terror with the specter of terrorism later on. So it really does a good job, I think, of following the trends and the zeitgeist of what people are being told to be afraid of, basically. There's a lot of important literary influences as well, like Catch 22. There's obviously a lot of Kafka-esque bureaucracy. You can see a lot of the themes of Eastern Bloc writers from the late 20th century, Stanislaw Lem in there, particularly looking at Memoirs Found in a Bathtub, the Futurological Congress, stuff like that. You can also read a little of the Strugatsky brothers. Monday Begins on Saturday in Doom City. And those are both informed by the whole Soviet ethos, which is funny because you're hunting communists, but the society that you're in is very communally built. So that's a nice bit of satire in there. Some of the modules are also great satire as well. That Yellow Clearance Black Box Blues, that's by John M. Ford, and that mix of comedy and sci-fi resulted in one of the most popular Star Trek tie-in novels, How Much for Just the Planet, which is another absurdist take on that genre. In the introduction to Yellow Clearance Black Box Blues, Ford mentions a couple of other authors there. There's Robert Sheckley, who, among other things, wrote a lot of satirical sci-fi, including The Seventh Victim, which became the basis of the Italian sci-fi film The Tenth Victim. And that's a future society that televises corporate-sponsored assassins. There was actually a game that my dad played in college that I think later became the Steve Jackson Killer game. That was the 10th Victim, and they basically played out the movie as a campus assassination game, which you could definitely not do anymore.
Yeah. A weird, stylish Italian version of the Running Man.
Yeah, it's so weird and so great. There's also Ron Goulart, a writer that has a strong comedic turn that ghost wrote the Tech War series for Shatner. That's great. And of course, there's a lot of the ideas from Philip K. Dick's work in there. So many themes running through there. There's the lack of control of the main character in Flow My Tears, the policeman said, the weird surrealism of Ubik, a lot of the paranoia and bureaucratic facade and lying in A Scanner Darkly with multiple personalities layered on top of each other. And in a lot of the supplements, there's a focus on mental health and drugs and medication in a lot of them, which is 1000% Philip K. Dick. There's also a lot of strong thematic connections to Kurt Vonnegut and a lot of other authors of that era. In terms of film, Paranoia has a lot more of the dystopian science fiction vibe rather than post-apocalyptic. Like we said before, the game itself credits Logan's Run and THX 1138. There's also the adaptation of The Trial, Alphaville. There's a movie called Seconds. Woody Allen's Sleeper has a lot of fun future alpha complexy stuff in it. Soylent Green, of course. Westworld. Zardoz is weirdly similar in that I forget what the society is called, but that like utopian society where no one can die. It gets infected by Sean Connery. A lot of that in there, and of course, Brave New World. But really, any kind of like mindfunk film can be seen carrying a little bit of that, like Videodrome and a lot of the Cronenberg surreal stuff like that. Yeah, like we said, Brazil comes out in '85, and that's a year after the first edition of Paranoia came out. And the steampunk aesthetic, the sort of old future, used future aesthetic doesn't really get integrated into the game, but its absurdist kind of a bureaucratic themes definitely do. And TV-wise, a lot of science fiction television shows will dip into computer-controlled, kind of don't look at the man behind the curtain, or 1984 style mutual paranoia themed societies. There's stuff in the Starlost. There's a lot of episodes of Doctor Who that do that. A lot of places they visit in the original series of Star Trek, and even some of the new ones, I think. Landry the Tyrant Computer and the Red Hour, or Return of the Archons in the original series.
It occurs to me now, I didn't even think about that until you were talking, that also you can feel a lot of The Prisoner in this. I had forgotten because it doesn't read necessarily as sci-fi to me, but yeah, I think there's a lot of that vibe in here.
Yeah, there's that whole weird kind of like late 60s, early 70s, sort of like psychedelic dystopia, like 10th Victim before, but like definitely The Prisoner has that authoritarianism, gaslighty, 1984 sort of like societal control through mind control themes that are 100% paranoia. And there's a lot of modern takes as well, the same thematic and tonal vibe. Mickey 17, which I just saw last week, which is great.
Yeah.
Silo, Ascension, these are like absurdist tales or worlds where the characters are gaslit about the nature of their existence. There's the movie, the one that really reminds me, I can't remember the name of it right now, but there's a movie in like a crashed spaceship that turns out to be underwater, or
Pandorum?
Pandorum, yeah. That gives me really strong alpha complex vibes.
Oh,
of
that's
like,
a good point.
this is our world, this is what it's like, and then they go outside and it's completely different. And of course, like you can also see a lot of this stuff in more modern stuff like Black Mirror and shows like that. And Fallout. It's super clear that Fallout wouldn't exist without paranoia. You could draw a pretty direct line from the tabletop role-playing game there to the black comedy of the vaults. All of the societal control around all that, both in the games and the TV show, which is also great.
So, Marc, you were the one who said, I want to do Paranoia early.
Yeah.
So, like, what is your experience with Paranoia as we kind of move on to talk about our general thoughts here?
In the late 80s, I think I played a lot of second edition. I think that's actually the only edition I've actually played. But I got the box set that had the book in it. It had another supplement in it. I think it was the complete troubleshooter, and that came with a lot of additional sort of options for world building stuff. But it also came with a lot of like paperwork. It came with a lot of like forms to fill out and like self-reporting treason forms to give the players. And that really added to the tone at the table. Paranoia back then felt like it was almost unique in encouraging, as a tabletop game instead of like a LARP or something, encouraging a really immersive experience in that you would give players handouts that made no sense, or have them fill out paperwork, or do some of the adventures like encourage you to like actually, when they wake up and go report for the mission, to like have the players get up and do calisthenics. Super cruel. Yeah, so I played a lot of second edition, not always to that extent, but it's always fun handing people, they've already got their way too complicated character sheets and just handing them more forms to fill out. Always a great time. I ran through a lot of the published material for second edition. A lot of great modules. The Mark IV, I think it is, the favorite of mine. I run through a lot of the published material, but it's also really easy to just like take the plot of a movie or TV show and just make that a mission.
Hmm.
I think the last time I ran it, which was probably 15 years ago, I just ran them through the plot of The Big Lebowski, only in Alpha Complex, which is a great plot to start off with because it's this wild goose chase that is meaningless anyway, which is perfect for paranoia. I never got into any of the metaplot stuff, which
Hmm.
is
Yeah, yeah. Talk about what those three tracks
yeah.
are.
So there's hints of it in one of the adventure books that I think it came in the box with second edition. One of the last scenarios was basically the crash. And then it's like, cool, Alpha Complex is gone. What do you do now? Does the computer come back? Do people devolve into tribal warfare or whatever? And then they explicitly took that out and made it part of this ongoing meta plot. They had a thing called the Secret Society Wars. It was more focused on the societies more directly messing with each other and causing inter-character conflict like that. I don't remember if that came out before or after the Marvel Secret Wars. I don't know.
After.
After, okay, so it was a parody of that
Yeah.
partly, and then they did the crash one where the computer goes down, Apple Complex goes down. You have to go outside. That's all that stuff. There's a lot of weird like time travel ones and like
Yeah, there's suggestion of the crash, like some of it coming from time travel, which results in you having a D&D themed module where a
right.
D&D world gets overlapped.
Yeah,
I think that's Orc Busters.
yeah, that's right.
And there's a couple of different cyberpunk crossover ones and a Wild West one. And of course, the vampire one I mentioned. These apparently sell well, but boy, they are not well received.
Yeah, and I think I was reading an interview with James Wallace about the red clearance edition, and I think something he said was really true. Where a lot of the old material, including the adventures, like they are really fun to read, and I don't know how much of them actually get run. Like they're really fun ideas, but it seems like just a disaster to try and actually play through. Yeah. And then they kind of wrapped all that up with like the reboot. So after the crash and everything, the computer comes back and things are all different, which is a fun idea and lets you add variation to it. But I think we're playing Paranoia for a reason, and
Hmm.
like the reason is like this is like uniquely and specifically weird and terrible and interesting, and to like get away from that for too long doesn't feel super fun to me. I don't know.
I'll talk about my experience, and I want to talk about like kind of why we stopped. We played first edition,
Mhm.
and this would be for me high school, and there's a certain level of emotional maturity that is perhaps required for
Yeah.
paranoia that I don't think we had. And we played it several times, and it was definitely in that zap mode.
Mhm.
And it was definitely a game that led to a lot of bad feelings. Like people weren't yet ready to detach from their characters or detach from the game experience. And there was a lot of bleed over into other things. And I think that while still kept buying and reading modules for a while, boy, people did not want to play that at the table. It was really, really interesting. And at the risk of, let me tell you about my character, the one time I ever played in an RPG tournament
Mhm.
was up at the Metro Detroit Gamers. They had a 40-person paranoia tournament, and they broke everybody off into groups, and they had all these like GMs as high programmers, and it was more of a LARP kind of thing. And early on, they said, if you die, you have to go over here and talk to this person. And I am, by nature, paralyzingly shy.
Mhm.
So I determined there was no way that I was going to die. Like that was absolutely going to be my thing because I didn't want to go talk to a stranger. And I managed to, over the course of this, manipulate things and drag my group along and avoid. And we got towards the end, I could see them moving all of the groups into one area.
Mm.
And I said to myself, they're going to kill everyone there. And we had gotten a punishment earlier that we had to go to therapy. And we went to one of the people and I said, we absolutely desperately have to get to therapy. And we went and they kept trying to get us to go. And finally they were like, okay, go stand over there. And they made us go and sit and they killed everyone off. And we won the tournament because we hadn't managed to get killed. So I think that's probably my most positive experience of paranoia was using my own psychological limitations to drive my play.
Amazing.
One of the things that Designers and Dragons says, I think is really interesting in a modern context, some of the limitations for sales of paranoia for West End games, and this is some talk. I'm not entirely sure how true it is or not. It was not built for a campaign. The
Yeah.
the game explicitly has you burning through characters, especially in second edition. They're like, kill off the characters, just do it.
Kill the bastards.
And that works against people having a lot of buy-in and being able to sell things to people doing those long play campaigns. And that focus on one shot or short-term campaigns in the 80s and 90s was a negative. But I don't think that's a negative today. Like given online play, given the way that we're structuring things, people are more used to playing one shots, two shots, or even a month campaign and that feeling satisfying. What do you think about that?
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. And the Mongoose, the later Mongoose editions that like explicitly are designed for not just one shots, but kind of episodic one shots. So even if your whole team gets blown away, the adventures, I guess, or missions are structured in a way that it's more like watching Alpha Complex in a TV show instead of following your character through. But yeah, I think people, I mean, there are still people who like want to play 10-year campaigns, and that's great. I think there's a huge audience for people who just like want to get in, have some fun, and get out. Much more now than there used to be.
Hmm.
I've only played the second edition, and I only read the red clearance and perfect editions in preparation for this. I will preface this with saying that I think Grant Howitt and James Wallace and them are great designers. I love almost everything they've done. I don't think I'm a huge fan of the red clearance edition. I'm a big fan of the cards, but reading through, I didn't have the physical book, but reading through it, it felt kind of like itch.io PDF style. I really like a lot of like mechanical updates. I was thinking as I was making the notes for this, like, oh, if I were to redesign Paranoia today, I would probably do this. I'm like, oh, a lot of that is actually in the red clearance edition. But the perfect edition, I think, really is like a great refinement of all of those good ideas. I think the as a product is much more coherently put together. The art is I really like the kind of painter-y but still cartoonish style. And it feels like it just hangs together a lot
Hmm.
better. I'm a big fan of cards in RPGs. I think 75% of the RPGs I've written use cards. But I think it does make it more difficult, even though it's easier to get the box, pick it up, open it up, and play in a few minutes. I think there's a friction there for people who want to like play online. So I think although I like the cards and there's still like if you have the cards, still use them. I feel like the like perfect edition is probably my favorite edition, even though I haven't played it yet. Just reading it, I'm just like
Hmm.
that seems really tight.
There is, I picked up that boxed set with the cards, and while I liked it, it also felt thin.
Yeah,
Like they really streamlined a lot. And I think for someone coming into paranoia cold,
yeah.
that's probably exactly the way you need to do it. But there's a sort of a fondness I have for the weird, stupid density
Mhm.
of those earlier things. And I think the Paranoia XP, the 25th edition, those definitely carry on to that without being the freaking three column design of second edition, which I find maddening. Why that became the standard for such a long time in the
War
80s
gamers.
is wild to me. But just an absolute text dump
Mhm.
of discussion there. And so there's a weird weight difference.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. One of the things which I don't think we talked about in the first couple editions, the player's book, at least I think, included a like choose your own adventure type solo mission in it.
Hmm.
It's like 3 or 4 pages. And I remember playing through that when I first got it, and it just like instantly communicates the tone of the game so perfectly,
Yeah.
especially as a GM. But if like you can get a player to take 10 minutes and run through that, like you know exactly what the game is. And that's I think that is missing from the newer editions. And I don't know if there's a place for it or if it should be like a little, 1 page supplement or whatever. But that was a really, really cool on ramp to the world because I think, clearly the mechanics have changed a lot over the years and there have been different tones with it.
Hmm.
But like the core of it, I don't think has changed at all. And I think although, I'm big system matters, mechanics definitely do communicate theme. I think as long as you get the core nugget of what paranoia is, a lot of the system is just kind of details. As long as you can get them people on the same page, then you're gonna have a good time.
There's an interesting thing. So we often make that distinction between system matters and table culture, right?
Yeah.
But here we have a third axis that is about the vibe
Mhm.
and what the game says it's going to be, what the
Yeah.
game what the game thinks it's going to be, and what it actually is. I was listening to a podcast about game design theory, and they talked about that gap between those that sometimes occurs. And I think we can see that in some games where I would say like Exalted, where it says it's going to be this, but when you actually get to the table, it's different. I think Paranoia, especially those early editions, do a really good job of selling, here's what the game is going to be like. And then, yeah, it actually is that when you get it to the table.
Yeah, and I think to be more precise for my game design brain, I think the mechanics matter less with this, but I include like vibes and setting, like that's all part of system for me.
Mm-hmm.
But like whether you're rolling
Yeah,
dice pool
it was
or
an interesting
percentile
distinction.
stuff,
Like I might actually separate those two out. That's an interesting way to think about that.
yeah, I think like system is just like everything that happens in the game at the table, whether it's mechanics or setting or table culture or whatever. That's
Interesting.
a very lover, but yeah, that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah. Uh, One of the things I find interesting, especially in going back and rereading the second edition, is we talked about the adversarial GM
Hmm.
as a thing, and the tone of the advice is really interesting because it really is, on the one hand, get them.
Yeah.
Like you should get them and things like that. But you kind of want to be fair, but you kind of want to be unfair. There's a weird back and forth discrepancy, I think, in that may be deliberate about what they're saying you need to do. But there's also a weird, like, these rules don't matter
Hmm.
in a way that is a repudiation of a lot of what is going on in game design and things like
Hmm.
that, which I find really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. It feels like that dramatic tactical combat system really feels like a core principle that goes through because I mean, you're a GM. You can just kill all the clones and wipe their memory and kill everyone instantly if you wanted to, right? If you actually just wanted to get them. But although they're saying you're playing this homicidal sociopathic society slash computer that wants the players dead and sending them on impossible missions and everything, what it's doing without actually saying explicitly is saying you as a GM are helping shape this story as a fun story instead of a game where someone is winning or losing. And I think that is a really important and interesting design choice that really rubs against a lot of the stuff that was happening at the time with D&D and all the other more explicitly like win by making numbers go up games.
Yeah.
I think it's really clever how they did that without actually explicitly saying it because I think there would be a lot of pushback against that from a
Yeah.
lot of people who actually want to play it.
It's also interesting, and I said this in our show notes. There are several things happening in this game in terms of its tone and approach that we have to think about in terms of the modern day. For one thing, the term gaslighting is
Hmm.
not a popular tone at the time, but it is absolutely what this game is about. And I
Yeah.
think that you would need to go in with your cats and your content warning
Hmm.
with players and say, like, just know that the authorities are going to be consistently, constantly gaslighting you. This is gaslighting the RPG.
Yep.
That is what this is about. And I think that you'd safety tools in the sense of communication tools, like you'd
Yeah.
want really want that to lean into to that side of things, getting that on the table so everybody's on the same page. This is one of those places where I think that's really important.
Yeah, and that definitely like wasn't the culture.
Right.
And like you said, you had some bad experiences with it. I had mostly good experiences with it in that respect, and I don't know how because we were playing as teenagers in the early 20s. We definitely did not have the emotional maturity to handle that. But it feels like there's a certain oh, and maybe it was my group of friends who were all very into that sort of cynical dystopian Brazil type stuff where everyone's on the same page of like
Yeah,
we are have a good time getting fucked with.
exactly. Everyone is on the same page, I think is so important. If one person is playing Zap
Yeah,
and the other players are playing classics, we've got a real discrepancy. And it is, we've had this conversation recently on Open Hearth about monster hearts and like tone and not wanting to get just a pickup group together. I think Paranoia may also fall into that category of a game
yeah,
that you absolutely want to make sure we've calibrated our expectations. We know what the game is going to be. We know what we want to be seeing at the game.
yeah. And I'm just astonished that that happened organically.
Yeah.
It could have gone so wrong, but
There's another thing I don't want to necessarily go into, but there's an interesting thing, I think, especially when we see the later modules in that later second edition and the fifth edition, because we just did Underground for Roll for Origin, boy, satire in the 1990s is oof.
yeah.
Uh, there's a lot of punching down
Mhm.
and a lot of stuff that you're just like, wow, tonally off. Treatment of mental health, treatment of pharmaceuticals,
Mhm.
just eesh.
Yeah, and it's hard to kind of judge, how much is being done mindfully. Like this is a brave new world. Like we are showing you a society where pharmaceutical treatment of a population is a thing, and it's not good, but we are presenting it as a fact. The treatment of there were sanity checks in first and second edition.
Yeah.
We are is that a comment on the nature of the society? Is that a dig at Call of Cthulhu? Is that just something that they put in because they thought it would be a good idea?
Yeah, you just don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to gauge that.
Ralston comes on second edition, and he's also a Chaosium writer, so I don't know how much there is that like overlap. And it definitely feels like a thing that aims towards more of the dark satire. Like there's so
Yeah,
many, it is, especially when you get the supplements for second edition, you're like, wow, a lot of these pieces and parts are going in different directions, in
yeah.
vastly different directions for very different games. And I think it's admirable that when Mongoose comes, they manage to make that coherent.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
One of the things I want to mention that, again, going back to that Mongoose edition and Alan Varney is, and this is something I remember happening at the time, when they get the Mongoose edition and Varney comes on board, one of the things he does is he does this massive lexicon game with a wiki that ends up being called the toothpaste disaster. And for those of you not familiar, a lexicon game is basically where you're creating a encyclopedia with entries. And when you make an entry, and I'm sort of vaguing on the rules, but when you make an entry, you have to reference one previous entry and you have to create two blank entries, things that have not yet been explained. And then other people will build on those. And they got a big group of people and created this entire encyclopedia of a story about something that happened in Alpha Complex, Milorad Pavik's Dictionary of the Khazars, and there's some other books that are written in this kind of style. And this is before we have community content that's actually published and things like that. But they draw on material that is presented there in the toothpaste disaster for the background of their alpha complex. And in fact, apparently recruited a number of the people who wrote from that to come on board and write for the new Paranoia. And that is, we don't talk about that, but it's like that's huge. We talk about
Yeah.
Usenet and the evolution of those things, but this is a real change and development in how we're online interacting with companies and with designers and with developers, and something that I really haven't seen replicated since then, at least
Mhm.
at least that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, not that scale for sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's super cool.
One of the interesting things in the second edition write-up and first edition to a certain extent, that when you come to red
Mhm.
edition stuff, is there is a very detailed explanation of how the apocalypse occurred in second edition. It is very particularly that there are all of these computers, and they are all over the world with controlling different systems, and there is an accident that gets read as an attack, and that sets off things, and then there is a cascading fail state of these computers going for protection and cutting themselves off and becoming paranoid about other systems and things like that. And it is a nuclear war. Like at base, it is a nuclear war breaks out, and we get these bunkers that are self-contained that have these, war game style mad computers. And it's a couple of pages of explanation that like these are the anxieties of the 80s. These
Yeah, so
that is what we're pretty certain is going to happen. And that in the updating, besides all the technical and sociological updating that we get with the 21st century version of paranoia, that is less important. Like that, like how we actually got here becomes faded out. Now, mind you, all of that story is just for the GM. Players have
yeah.
no idea and should not have any idea. But I think that really interesting in terms of the shift as anxieties. And on a related note, you mentioned that terrorism becomes the new threat, that communism as a threat kind of gets washed out, but social influencing and phishing scams and things like that, all of that modern stuff, because those are things that are currently going on, those get baked into the latest version of paranoia. And I have to wonder what the next paranoia looks like in
Yeah.
5 or 10 years. How much, like, how do you integrate crazed religious fundamentalism and the war on science as a thing? And like, it actually, I don't like thinking about it.
Yeah, and that I mean, I didn't like thinking about accidental nuclear works going off as a teenager. It's like, yeah, and it feels like they're already heading in a direction. I don't know if there are plans for another edition. I imagine there will be just because of the history. But even in the Perfect Edition, there's everyone has these sort of ocular implants, very very Black Mirror, where like you can see everyone's like treason stars and ratings and stuff. And if someone gets a flag put on them, you can see like, okay, I can execute that person. And so there's already kind of like a social media mob justice thing built into it already. And I imagine if they continue developing, it's just going to keep going in better and more presently terrible directions. And
Protect the children, even though there are
yeah,
no children.
Ugh. Oof. Yeah, yeah. So many things they could do.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about paranoia?
God, it's a really fond memory I have. Something that felt really pinned to a specific time, and looking at the later editions, it feels like something I would definitely run again now. I think I would love to give the new editions a try out, and Yeah, I think like we were saying, I think the core of it is timeless. Just that sort of feeling of authority creating this untruth to control society,
Hmm.
and how you either go along with it or fight with it, futilely or not.
Right.
It just feels like always good.
And behind the scenes, again, back to the gaslighting, one of the themes that runs through that is so much of the counter culture is actually both infiltrated by the
Yeah,
computer and created
created.
by the computer.
Yeah.
Like that is at core. There's also this weird vibe of your rebellion is useless because it's already undercut, which
Mhm.
there's a weird sense of hopelessness, nihilism in the game
Oh yeah,
that I
100%.
think the funny bits maybe right over what's actually
Yeah.
going on there.
And also that there's not like a singular mastermind who's actually doing everything. It's just like a bunch of powerful jerks fighting against each other that are just accidentally creating this monstrosity.
Yeah.
It's like there's no intention or reason behind it. It's all just a giant mess.
AI is creating hallucinations and
Mhm.
all the way down.
Yeah.
Listeners, that is our show. Roll for Mutation is a production of the Open Hearth gaming community. You can find out more about that at openhearthgaming.com. We have a Patreon that supports this podcast and all of our other podcasts. It supports our gaming calendar and our work there. We have a Discord you can join that is mostly focused on the kinds of games that we play in the community, but also we have a little section for talking about the podcast and things if you want to come and give us comments. As always, writing reviews, leaving stars, whatever, or even just sharing this on social media really helps us out. Marc, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for talking with us.
And listeners, that is our show.